Hi guys, this is Andy McDonald and welcome to the Informed Performance podcast. On today's episode, I have Dr Sherylle Calder, a sports scientist, performance coach, and the founder and CEO of EyeGym. In this episode, Dr Calder is going to provide us with a very unique insight into how she improves athletes' visual performance. Dr Calder has a very extensive background working with some top athletes and teams around the world, but she's perhaps best known for her work with some successful Rugby World Cup winning teams. If you're enjoying the podcast, then please make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends. On a side note, if there's any areas of performance and sports medicine that you would like to hear more about, or perhaps you have a guest suggestion, then please drop us an email on the informedperformance.com website, or drop us a message on our Instagram page, Informed Performance. Anyway, here is the conversation between myself and Dr. Sherylle Calder. Dr. Sherylle Calder, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Just to begin with, could you take us through your story? I guess I'm aware you were a former sports person, and I'm quite keen to understand how you went from being a sports person to developing an interest professionally in visual performance and kind of where you are today. Okay,
so it's quite a long story and taken quite a couple of parts, but in the end, probably my first career was playing field hockey for South Africa. But it took a little bit of a different turn to normal people or normal elite athletes. I played some of my hockey in isolation. So when South Africa were not allowed to compete against other athletes in the world. And we eventually got back into international sport. And I did play quite a number of tests for South Africa. But what I did when we were isolated, I had this yearning to measure myself against other hockey players in the world. And isolation for South Africa was, we didn't get any magazines, we had no television, we had access to absolutely nothing. You know, a lot of books never came into the country and all kinds of stuff. So we were really isolated, and I just felt if I could get overseas and just compete against other international hockey players, it would give me an idea of the status of my own performance. And I actually, while we were still isolated, as soon as my season ended, even though I played a few rebel tours, we had people coming into South Africa and played for South Africa in a couple of those. The true international competition was really competing, you know, in the normal international world. So I went over on my own. The first country I went to was Germany, and I played 2 seasons in Holland. I played a season in England. But after my long season in South Africa, I went overseas and just no money, absolutely nothing, and just asked people, could I play in their club? And then started experiencing all these visual components, which today is actually my career. And I just discovered that so many people playing in all these different countries kept saying to me, how do I do that, or how do I see that? And I just thought, you know, why are they asking this? You know, it should be that they see what I do. And then quickly discovered when we got back into international sport, out of isolation, played test hockey, and then realized I do see different. I got selected for some teams, and people wrote me emails saying, it's amazing, you know, you never run on the field and all those kind of stuff. And I just thought, wow, you know, what's going on? And then up to a point where I realized, yeah, I do things differently. And I'm actually going to backtrack and research and show that I knew that I trained my eyes and my brain and my body in a different way as a young kid, just by having this really inquiring mind about how do you do it, how do you judge, how do you target, and etc. It's kind of the way I kept myself busy as a young kid, and which then culminated in me developing all these skills, which had an influence on how I played hockey, and then decided that if I wanted to follow a career or show people that this really works, that I needed to do research. And a really long story, I then approached University of Cape Town professor. His name is Tim Noakes, more famous for the whole Banting philosophy today. but a physiologist and medical doctor at that point. And I just said to him, this is what I think. I believe it's trainable. I believe you can improve performance if you train your eyes and your brain and your motor response. And he said, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll teach you to research and you teach me what you know. And I started on this journey, which it was daunting, even though I believed in what I was doing because I knew it worked. So, and everyone thought I was crazy. It didn't really matter. And then eventually completed my PhD while I was still studying, while I was playing hockey for South Africa. Completed my PhD, and in 1996, the first Sports Science Institute opened up in South Africa, in Cape Town. And I approached them and said, would they give me an office? And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, this is what I believe. And they said, yeah, you can have an office. And I moved in there in 1996 and started from zero with a desk and a chair, and started exploring what I believed. And I completed my PhD in 1999. So, but then started working already. And the probably first international team I worked with, or out of South Africa team I worked with, was Surrey Cricket in 1997, I think, round about there. And soon after that with Pakistan cricket. And then completed my PhD in 1999. And then first big rugby team I worked with was the All Blacks in 2001 and 2. And from there, I went on to work with England. I worked with Australia cricket in the meantime, and many other international teams. And then in 2012, I worked with Ernie in winning the British Open in golf. So those were kind of, if I must highlight, those are probably the more important things I did, but tons of other stuff that were as important.
Just to kind of backtrack, when you kind of went through that research process, how did you kind of formalize or funnel those tried and tested experiences that you'd done yourself, and kind of formalize them into, kind of box them into being a research title and a more structured project? How did you kind of go through that process, or what specifically did you look at?
I had already identified which skills were important for me as a player, which kind of divided me from others. And as I mentioned, in 1996, I started working already at the Sports Science Institute, and then started working with international teams. And I found that amongst all these teams, there were trends. And even though I always presumed that the elite athlete is really good at most skills, I realized very quickly that everyone has strengths and weaknesses in their visual motor system. And everyone is unique, where one guy would be really good at a certain skill, another player would be bad at that skill. And I realized early days that those skills are all trainable. So really a combination of what I learned, combination of what I saw with these elite athletes, and what I knew you need to do to improve performance. And that's how I've really formulated all that research.
And when you talk about these skills, are you kind of are you completely referring to the visual skills that they have within their sport?
Yeah, visual response skills or visual motor skills.
Got you. And just kind of broadly speaking, when a team or an athlete enlists your expertise, what do you do? Kind of what does that offering look like when you turn up at the facility to start working with them as a process?
Yeah, it's really unique to the team or the environment or the culture or whatever I deal with. But basically, for me, the ideal world is eye to eye. So meeting with each player, arrive at the facility, meet the coaches, meet those who head up the performance department, and then assess every single player individually. And then formulate that, and then immediately create training programs for them. And kind of
what are some of the ways in which that you do assess them? Are you able to kind of break down to some degree what that kind of visual assessment looks like?
It's pretty extensive, but I could probably mention some of which I think are the more important skills. So I think one of the really important skills for any athlete is something called visual recognition, and that is the ability to see something early, to have time to execute whatever you do. And if you look at the really best of the best in the world, it always seems like they do things in slow-mo and they've got so much time to perform and execute the skill. So that is a trainable skill. The ability to judge is really important. Where you are in space and where others are in space and where the ball is in space, or depending on what sport you're involved in. I even did 2000, I worked with Prado America's Cup. And, a lot of people have always said to me, but there's not a ball involved and etc. But they need to judge the water. They need to see what they can read the wind on the water, etc. So there are a lot of other skills that are important. And then awareness, the other skill is awareness, ability to feel what is happening around you. And that involves skills like peripheral awareness. So I don't talk about peripheral vision because we all have a measure of that. But awareness is how quickly I respond to any stimuli around me. It could be sport, it could be driving a car, it could be anything you're doing. So those three skills I think are really crucial. And there are a lot of other eye movement skills, etc., that we measure. We measure simple reaction time, we measure choice reaction time, and various other skills.
Do you kind of look at general ophthalmic health at the same time, or is that a separate piece?
No, that's completely separate. So I always say we are not ophthalmic, we're not optometrists, we are sports scientists, and we work with the performance of the athlete. Those are two entities completely on their own, and I don't venture into them at all.
And is that the same with vestibular stuff as well? Or do you kind of tie in any vestibular stuff with the awareness as well? Or
of course, there is a measure of that. But I do not test sight, and I do not deal with injury of the eye or disease of the eye, etc. Those guys are the experts in that.
Yeah. And when you've done your assessment, I know this is a very contextual and it depends kind of question, but
Yes.
What are the kind of training methods that you use to actually improve somebody's visual performance skills? I know it depends on what you've assessed, but what are kind of some ways in which that you actually kind of facilitate the improvements?
Yeah, so part of my PhD was also there's a section which I at that point called visual coaching, as because I believe because the individual is unique, he has a unique system, and we've probably assessed about 100,000 elite athletes in all different kinds of sports.
Wow.
We've never found anyone that is exactly the same as anyone else. So everyone needs to use their visual system unique to themselves. So, for example, Andrew, you would be, say you're playing football. You would be better seeing a ball coming from the one side than from the other side, for example. And you would have better peripheral vision than I have, so you'll pick up information earlier. And I need to find out all those things of athletes and then teach them how to use those skills effectively. And as I said, that we all have these strengths and weaknesses in this visual motor system, and I need to teach the individual or coach the individual to using their skills effectively.
Are you ever able to kind of work out why somebody does have maybe a weaker link in their visual chain of like why one skill is more developed or one side is more developed? Are you ever able to dig into their history and pull out that information?
So as I've assessed all these great athletes all over the world, if I really find someone unique, I would ask them a little bit about their background and where they come from, etc. And I really believe that we develop these skills by the nature of how we grow up. And there's definitely a correlation between the really good ones and, the great ones. So and I think, please don't think that I think I was great, but what I did as a kid, I actually, without knowing, trained all these skills by doing all those experiments that I did. And I was training all these abilities. So when I got to compete out of isolation against some of the best hockey players in the world, I could kind of hold my own. And only because I thought I knew I had trained these abilities. And if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's through kind of like different drills using the ball or using different sort of training environments?
I like to tell parents, for example, let your kids jump over fences and walk on walls and climb in a tree and do all those stuff, because you are actually developing the skills which we use in elite sport today. That is the basis of creating all those visual motor skills.
Whilst we're kind of talking, I guess, about youth, do you see much of a trend from a visual standpoint in how well people perform visually as to whether they've, been an early specializer in a sport or whether they've played a variety of sports growing up?
It's probably a hard one to answer. It depends what age you do it at. I think at an early age, I believe it's good to do, because you're actually developing different skills, because as human beings we're pretty good at not using the skills we're not good at. So I believe that if you participate in different activities or different sports, you would be required to use skills that you don't use in the other activity, and I think it's great to be able to develop overall skills and then be selective when you eventually choose which sport you want to participate in.
Yeah, because it's definitely the case for other more perhaps physical aspects of training with people now, proving that it's better to have played a variety of sport early on than to have specialised early.
Because end of the day, you're just equipping yourself with a certain skill set and not an overall skill set if you specialise too early.
And I guess, sport is chaotic, so the kind of bigger variety of stimulus you've had, the bigger variety of athletic tools that you can actually, unleash on the competitive field.
Yeah.
Just kind of thinking as a clinician, are there any kind of key performance indicators that you track? With your tests, is there kind of like an objective system that you use to appraise your effectiveness or the progress that the athlete's making?
You could probably go and try it out on the website at EyeGym.com. There's an assessment, a basic assessment that you can assess yourself on. There are performance indicators that we use. We do a reassessment, and then we did some interesting work to give you an idea of some of it. We worked with Aussie Rules, where they had a system of measuring decision making, and our aim with that team was to assess the athletes, put them on a training program, reassess them, and then assess, did we impact decision making? And they believed that if we could, that they believed it's a tool that they could use going forward. And we did impact decision making by 5% or something, but for us 1% is good enough, because we believe if we can make each individual make one better decision on the field of play in a group. You can imagine if you just take rugby for example, if you've got 15 players and you make 15 better decisions in a match, it should influence performance. So there are different performance indicators.
With regards to decision making, when you kind of go into a team, who's like the main liaison for you? Is it the technical and tactical coaches that kind of have the influence on strategy, or is it more the sports medicine sort of personnel?
It's real mix of. We deal with a lot of sports medicine, who normally head up the performance department, but we deal with a mix. We do a lot of work with coaches. Because part of our job when we go into working with a team, other than assessing the players and teaching them how to use their system effectively, we also try and influence how coaches set up training drills to challenge these components of the athlete or the player.
I remember years ago I was I was working in professional rugby, and before the weight sessions, players would do warm-up exercises that were primarily focused around proprioception and stability. Lots of which of those exercises involved throwing and catching tennis balls, reacting to where the ball goes whilst being in certain positions or on certain surfaces. Is there any kind of ways that you think, maybe coaches or physios or people involved in sports performance, is there any kind of ways they can start to not copycat what you do, but borrow some ideas and implement that in their programs for athletes?
Yeah, I think physios, etc. A lot of those professional people do a ton of all of that. However, we believe to really impact performance, you need to train at a level way higher than you experience in the game or in the match or in the activity that you participate in, and you need to train the athlete almost in an uncomfortable position, and at a level that he's never experienced, and that's really what we do in EyeGym. We challenge him in all the skills, some of which he's not good at, and we challenge him at a level which is so high, which he would never experience really in the match, but we train him up to be able to handle whatever happens on the field of play.
So you can kind of, with the visual system, you can almost in training overwhelm them, which I guess with, say, collision-based sports, there's no way you can overwhelm them with collisions in training because of the risk.
No.
But with the visual stuff, you can really throw a lot at them as a stimulus.
So we can in the training sessions are based on 10-minute training sessions, and we can in 10 minutes we can get the individual to make about 500 decisions based on something he's never seen before. So you can imagine how that stresses the system, because as human beings we like to almost think ahead what we might see, or what we expect to see and anticipate, which is good sometimes, but most times it's not. So we want you to see exactly what is happening and process that information as quickly and accurately, and then respond to that. And that's really how we train them up.
And did you prescribe 10 minutes because that's kind of the optimal stimulus, or is it because that fits into warm-ups and training schedules, elsewhere in the program?
No, we believe that's the optimum. So we started, my early days, I actually trained the players manually, where I used to throw balls and, like you explained earlier on. But I quickly realized that that doesn't stimulate and stress the individual enough, and that was too easy for them, and then I needed to find ways of making it harder, and that's where I eventually got to developing a training program where I took everything I learned as a professional hockey player and as a scientist, and I've built all those parameters into this training program, and that is what they train on today.
You've mentioned EyeGym. Do you kind of have any resources that coaches can use to help them start developing visual skills, or is your offering kind of purely from a kind of consultancy level? It's more from a consultancy level, but we work with people all over the world, some of who we've never seen. So they're individuals on our training programs, and they can train remotely. They in fact can train anywhere in the world. We can monitor them, so we have a back end where we can see what they train, when they train. We can adjust their programs. We can assess them, we can reassess them, etc. Is there? Sorry, just backtracking a little bit. We were talking about dosing a minute ago with how long is optimal. Is there? How much kind of rest does somebody need in their visual system? Can they do this, a few times a day or every day, or do they need rest like other aspects of training?
They get 10 minutes a day. After that, the program discontinues. When you're unfit, just like you might be physically unfit, and I give you training to do, say 10 minutes to do. Some initially start off, they're really fatigued. But what I was actually going to say earlier, initially our training programs were 30 minutes long. But because the technology of what we do and the software program has improved so much, that we're able to condense it and maximize the 10 minutes that we have.
Brilliant. And are you active on social media? Is there kind of places where you post ideas or content, or people can at least follow you?
We're on Twitter and on Facebook. Really those two. And we have our website. Cool. There's information.
I'll put links to all of those kind of profiles on our show notes on our website. Cool. Well, Sherylle, I think that's all we've got time for today, but thank you so much for coming on the show and providing our listeners with such a unique angle on how you can enhance performance.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks again to Dr. Sherylle Calder for coming on today's show. Next week's guest will be performance consultant Dr. Fergus Connolly, so stay tuned for that one. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and give us a follow on Instagram @InformPerformance or on Twitter @InformPod. Thanks again for listening.